Hello and welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining. I'm Patricia Lopez from UNED. And first of all, I'd like to thank the organization of this Congress for the opportunity to share with you part of my research on Erna Brodber's work, especially the novel The Rainmaker's Mistake. Today, I'll show how Erna Brodber's fourth novel, The Rainmaker's Mistake, bridges postcolonial critique and Afrofuturist imagination. We'll move from the novel's plantation allegory to its bold re-engineering of time, space, and community, asking how Brodber turns memory into technology for liberation. Let's begin with the writer and the intellectual tradition she expands. Erna Brodber is a Jamaican writer, historian, and sociologist whose work, fictional work, consistently centers Black identities through resistance, femaleness, and spirituality. She's the author of novels such as Jane and Louisa Will Soon Come Home, Mile, Louisiana, The Rainmaker's Mistake, and Nothing's Mad, as well as a collection of short stories titled The Word is the High Hill. Across her work, Brodber writes fiction as social therapy, using narrative to heal historical wounds and to reshape how communities see themselves. In my reading today, I argue that the novel is both a post-colonial recovery of silenced histories and an Afrofuturist act of word-making. Brodber critiques how colonial power unmade Black humanity, and she mobilizes myth, memory, and speculative techniques to imagine how that humanity can be remade collectively. With that in mind, let's move on to what was happening historically around the novel's release and where does the story place us. Um, The novel was published in 2007, coinciding with the bicentenary of the abolition of the Slave Trade Act in the British Caribbean islands, which took place in 1807. After some decades, the apprenticeship period took place in 1834 before the full emancipation took place in 1838. So the novel participates in reflections on the Atlantic slave trade while setting its action around emancipation in Jamaica. Brodber adopts allegory intertwined with speculative imagination, a form that lets the novel speak to two times at once: 19th century plantation society and our present debates about repair, memory, and futurity. The plot looks simple at first glance, but it's actually a sophisticated parable of unmaking and remaking humanity. We made in this novel an enslaved community who call themselves the young people. Their master, Mr. Charlie, has implanted an origin myth according to which the people are actual yam. He planted them so that their very lives, he claims, is brought from him. Under this myth, they do not age or reproduce or die. They are perpetuated in stagnation. When emancipation comes in 1848, the old order totally collapses. The community migrates to Cabarita Island. The land is divided into continents, and they have to begin the hard work of learning how to be human, that is, to live, to love, to labor, remember, and eventually to accept mortality. A core mystery is the figure of Woodville. He is the overseer who once enforced the master's rule, his system and tie up the African spirit within this character. These figures are tied to rainmaking, memory, and betrayal. All these ideas that compound the story. As the young children, the youngest characters in the novel is Queenie, Essex, Luke, Little Congo, and London. As they investigate, they expose the plantation myth, confront the erasure of mothers, and reclaim kinship and history. The discovery of who truly fathers them and why memory was washed away is the hint that restores mortality and reproduction, keys to regained humanity. With the plot scaffold in place, let's unpack the postcolonial critique and the African knowledge systems that power this recovery. Brodber shows how colonial power works by story, by fabricating origins that infantilize the enslaved and delete maternal lineage. Founders' Day rituals are every year celebrated and they keep the lie, the myth alive. The community's counter move is also narrative. Investigating, naming, and remembering is the important clue for these people. Here, African epistemologies return as living frameworks. Um, Throughout the novel, throughout the different stories, we encounter different examples of these epistemologies, as for example, Akan practices of naming link the child to soul and ancestry. Brodber writes the plantation's naming ceremony so that African names persist beneath the master's nose. Yoruba practices of honoring the dead frame the burial mounds as active sites of counsel. The ancestors speak into the present. As well, Igbo values of work, adaptability, entrepreneurship, and creativity shape Cabareta's rebuilding. Work makes a man becomes an ethical refrain throughout the novel. And finally, Bantu Congo councils of honored elders resonate with the community's governance. Brodber also refuses the double colonization of Black women by empire and patriarchy, exposing how reproductive control and sexual violence underwrote the plantation. She resents mothers' graves, bodies, and labor as the ground of a reclaimed history. The yam itself becomes a rich ecological sign. It represents rootedness, sustenance, and divine providence, challenging the master's use of the crop as a myth of male creation. These recoveries prepare the novel's most striking move, a transformation of time and space that aligns with Afrofuturist thought. Afrofuturism asks how Black communities retime history, what Kodwo Eshun calls chronopolitics. Brodber folds times together in the novel. The narrative leaps, for example, across 1834 and 1838, she overlays multiple narrators and even turns the past into an actual place the children can physically visit. Meanwhile, Cabarita anchors the present, and the future with capital F becomes an island of encounters, trade, and birth or death, that is a space of becoming. Moreover, technology is deliberately ambivalent. Mr. Charlie's patent and aqueduct symbolize colonial science that optimizes extraction and enforces control, then rots when the master vanishes. In contrast, the children improvise tools that cross boundaries, Queenie's kayak, Essex waterplane, Lido Congo's development of formidable streams are all examples of their ability to create and use technologies. Finally, London's line, "I was a robot," condenses both dehumanization under the plantation's bio-experiments and a future tense of new identities. Especially, Brodber aligns with Gleason's idea of relation, is that identities are rooted and open, errant and connected, and with Gilroy's notion of the Black Atlantic, where movement, exchange and hybridity define community. The novel maps a network of islands and waters where memory circulates and identities assemble. In this sense, the Rainmaker's mistake doesn't just remember a past. It prototypes a future Caribbean world across fractured geographies. If time and space are engineered, voice must be as well. That's where Brodber's community storytelling matters. Brodber composes the novel as polyphony. We have the narrative voices of Queenie, Luke, Essex, Little Congo, Miss Matilda, Castor, and London. But no single voice claims truth. Instead, knowledge is produced between voices, ages, and experiences. Luke's invented story of the Black Lace people models how counter myths can guide children past fear toward agency. This is a political aesthetics. Narrative authority is redistributed from the master's monologue to a community chorus. This technique extends work Brodber developed in her previous novel, Louisiana, where living researchers, ancestral spirits, and the fictional editor co-author a community tale. In The Rainmaker's Mistake, the same ethos heals the fracture between past and future. Storytelling becomes infrastructure, the social technology that supports a shared horizon of freedom. Let's now pull these threads together. Why does this novel matter now? And what does it add to Caribbean studies and Afrofuturism? Well, first, the bridge. Brodber demonstrates that postcolonial recovery and Afrofuturist speculation are not opposites. Repairing memory and prototyping futures are the same project when communities must unlearn colonial time. Second, the method. Brodber's fusion of myth, allegory, and hard science reframes Caribbean fiction as a laboratory for reparative chronopolitics, the deliberate retiming of history so communities can live, work, love, and die on their own terms. Third, the scope. The novel expands Afrofuturism's geography beyond the United States frame, centering Caribbean Black futures shaped by archipelagic movement, African epistemologies, and collective authorship. I'll close by returning to the novel's final movement, from myth to mortality to freedom. Brodber's community learns that mortality is not a curse, but a capacity to love responsibly, to parent, to mourn, to build. When the young people accept birth and death, they reclaim what the plantation suspended, time that belongs to them, history that belongs to them. Storytelling anchored in mothers, ancestors, labor, and shared decision making becomes the engine of a different future. So the takeaway is simple and difficult. Freedom requires new stories and new clocks. In The Rainmaker's Mistake, Brodber shows how to craft both. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Patricia Lopez at UNED. If you need the bibliography or any further details, please feel free to email me. Goodbye.